Cold stone. That was the first thing. Hermione dragged in a breath that tasted like ozone and burning copper. The spell smoke hung thick in the air, biting the back of her throat. She coughed, a dry, rattling sound in the empty space. She pushed herself up. Her palms scraped against the floor. Something was wrong. The air didn't smell like blood. It didn't smell like the damp decay of the forest, or the dust of falling castle walls. It smelled like floor wax and old parchment. She blinked against the gloom. The moonlight fell in sharp, geometric lines through the tall windows. The Astronomy Tower. She was standing in the Astronomy Tower. She reached for her wand. It was there, solid and familiar in her pocket, but the pocket itself was wrong. The fabric was too heavy, too clean. She looked down at herself. A pleated skirt. A grey sweater. The crimson and gold trim of a Gryffindor tie. A school uniform. Her breath hitched. She looked at her left arm. The sleeve was pushed up slightly. The skin was smooth, pale, unbroken. She pressed her thumb into the spot where the scar should be. She pressed hard, feeling for the raised, jagged edges of the word mudblood. Nothing. She rubbed the skin until it turned red, her chest rising and falling in short, sharp bursts. The spell had broken. It was supposed to take her back 6 months. 6 months, just enough time to intercept the curse, just enough time to pull Fred out of the way. This wasn't 6 months. 1996. She whispered to the empty room. Or 97. 6th year. She started pacing. The stone was freezing against her sensible school shoes. Okay. Think. She started cataloguing facts under her breath. The battle of the Department of Mysteries is over. Sirius is dead. Dumbledore is alive. The locket is in the cave. The cup is in the vault. The diadem is in the room of requirement. She kept walking, heel to toe, measuring the length of the tower floor. If it's autumn, the poisoned mead hasn't happened. The cursed necklace hasn't happened. The cabinet in the room of requirement is broken. She rubbed her arm again. The phantom pain flared, a ghost of a memory that hadn't happened yet. The timeline is intact. I just have to maintain it. I can't change anything. If I change anything, the causal loop collapses. I just have to wait. Wait 3 years. Live through it all again. Her stomach turned over. The tent. The snatchers. The manor. She stopped pacing. She couldn't breathe. The air in the tower felt suddenly too thin, too cold. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced the words out between her teeth, a desperate chant to hold herself together. Dumbledore dies in June. The Ministry falls in August. We go on the run. If you don't shut up, Granger, I'm going to throw you off this tower. Hermione froze. The voice came from the darkest corner of the room. It was quiet. It was exhausted. And it was unmistakable. She spun around, her wand snapping up, leveling at the shadows. Who's there? A shape detached itself from the gloom. He didn't draw his wand. He didn't even put his hands up. He just leaned back against the stone wall, the moonlight catching the sharp, pale angles of his face. Draco Malfoy. He looked wrong. The perfectly pressed Slytherin uniform belonged in 6th year, but his posture didn't. He was pressed flat against the solid stone, scanning the open archways like a soldier waiting for an ambush. "You've broken time, Granger." His voice was clipped. Flat. Hermione lowered her wand a fraction of an inch. "Malfoy?" "Obviously." He didn't move from the wall. He just watched her, his jaw clenching briefly before he let out a short, hollow exhale. "I was trying to fix it." She snapped, the panic rising in her throat again. It was a single-use chrono-displacement charm. It was supposed to take me back to May. Well, congratulations. He pushed a hand through his pale hair. It was longer than she remembered from 6th year. Less styled. "Now we can all die twice." "You." She searched his face, trying to make the pieces fit. "You were there. In the ruins of the courtyard." "I was." "The spell. It pulled you too?" "It appears so." She took a step forward. He didn't flinch, but his eyes tracked her movement with terrifying focus. "Why were you near the blast radius?" "You were supposed to be with your parents." "They're dead, Granger." The words were empty, devoid of the sneer he used to wear like armor. There wasn't exactly a safe zone left. Hermione went perfectly still. She remembered the final hours of the battle. The absolute chaos. The bodies lining the Great Hall. The sheer, overwhelming loss. And Malfoy, standing in the rubble, watching the world burn down around him with nothing left to lose. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Right now. I'm going to try not to freeze to death on this bloody floor. You know what I mean. The timeline." He finally looked away from her, his gaze drifting out toward the Black Lake. The surface was ink-dark, reflecting the stars. "The timeline," he repeated. It sounded like a curse. "We can't touch it." She said, the words spilling out fast, frantic. "We have to let it play out. Every event. Every casualty. If we try to stop Dumbledore's death, or the Ministry falling, we could create a paradox that unravels the entire reality." He looked back at her. His eyes were cold, but not with malice. It was the absolute, deadened cold of someone who had survived too much. "By all means, Granger," he said softly. "Let's preserve the timeline where we all die horribly." Excellent strategy. It's the only strategy. We know how we win. You call that winning? He pushed off the wall. It was a small movement, but Hermione stepped back instinctively, her wand rising again. He stopped. He looked at her wand, then at her face. "Stop rubbing your arm," he said. Her hand stopped on her left forearm. She hadn't even realized she was doing it. "It's not there," he said, his voice dropping a register, losing the sharp edge. "It hasn't happened yet." She dropped her hand. It felt heavy. "Useless. I can't go back to the tent." She whispered. The admission tasted like ash. "I won't do it again." Draco watched her. For a long, silent moment, the only sound in the tower was the wind howling through the open archways. "Then we change it," he said. "We can't. We are the only two people in this castle who know that the Dark Lord is going to turn this place into a slaughterhouse," he said. The words were clipped, precise. We know where the Horcruxes are. We know who lives and who dies. You want to help us? She practically spat the word. You want to help Harry? I want to survive, Granger. His jaw clenched again. And right now, Potter's Crusade is the only thing that ends with me not standing over my mother's corpse. So yes, I'll help you. Hermione clamped her mouth shut. This was Draco Malfoy, the boy who had called her mudblood for 5 years. The boy who was supposed to let the Death Eaters into the school. But the person standing in front of her wasn't a boy. He was a veteran. We have to establish rules, she said finally. Her voice was steadier now. Planning was something she could do. No unilateral action. We agree on every change before we make it. Fine. We meet in secret. We don't change our behavior in public. You still hate me. I still despise you. That won't be difficult. She ignored the jab. And you don't fix the cabinet. He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. If I don't fix the cabinet, the Dark Lord kills me. We'll find a way around it. A way around it. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. You're very optimistic for someone who was having a panic attack 5 minutes ago. I was not having a panic attack. I was reorienting myself in time. Right. My mistake. He turned away from her, walking toward the spiraling stone staircase that led down to the castle. Where are you going? She demanded. To the Slytherin common room. Before Filch catches us and gives us detention for being out of bed. He paused at the top of the stairs, looking back over his shoulder. Try to get some sleep, Granger. We have potions in the morning. He disappeared down the stairs, his footsteps echoing against the stone. Hermione stood alone in the Astronomy Tower. She kept her eyes locked on the empty staircase, blood rushing in her ears. She had broken time. She was trapped in the past. And the only person in the entire castle who understood her panic, the only person who knew the truth, was Draco Malfoy. She turned and headed for Gryffindor Tower. The castle was exactly as she remembered it. The portraits slept in their frames. The suits of armor gleamed in the moonlight. It was perfect. And it was a lie. She slipped through the portrait hole. The common room was warm, the fire dying down to embers in the hearth. Where have you been? Hermione jumped. Harry was sitting in one of the oversized armchairs near the fire. He was wearing his pajamas, his glasses slightly askew, a heavy book open on his lap. Harry. She forced her voice to stay even. I was just in the library. I lost track of time. He closed the book. The loud thud made her flinch. He stood up, walking over to her. His green eyes were sharp, searching her face in the dim light. The library closed 3 hours ago. He said, I was in the restricted section. It was a lie, but it was a lie he would believe. I was looking up something for Slughorn's essay. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her. Then he reached out and gently touched her wrist. Your hands are shaking, Hermione. She looked down. Her fingers were trembling, tiny, uncontrollable spasms. She pulled her hand away, curling her fingers into a fist. I'm just cold, she said, forcing a smile that felt brittle enough to shatter. It's freezing in the corridors. He nodded, but the suspicion didn't leave his eyes. Right. Well, you should get some sleep. You too. She walked past him, heading for the girls' dormitories. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked back. Harry was still standing by the fire, watching her. He was so young. They all were. She placed her hand on the doorknob of her dormitory. The timeline was shattered, and Draco Malfoy was the only piece left that still fit. Part 2. The Library Treaty. You look terrible, mate. Draco didn't look up from his plate. He didn't have to. Theonot's voice possessed a distinct, airy quality that made everything sound like a casual observation about the weather, even when he was dissecting someone's soul. I'm fine, Draco said. He pushed a piece of toast around his plate. It was Tuesday morning. The great hall was loud. Too loud. Every clatter of silverware, every burst of laughter from the Gryffindor table felt like a physical strike against his skull. He was used to silence. The silence of the manor. The silence of hiding. You don't look fine, Theo mused. He leaned his chin on his hand, observing Draco with dark, unblinking eyes. You look like you aged 3 years overnight. It's a very sudden maturity. Draco's grip tightened on his fork. He forced his hand to relax. He placed the fork down with deliberate care. I didn't sleep well, Draco said. It's nothing. Right. Nothing. Theo's gaze drifted across the hall. It landed, inevitably, on the Gryffindor table. Are we looking at anyone in particular? Because if you finally lost the plot, I'd like some warning before you do something dramatic. Draco followed Theo's eye line. Granger was sitting between Weasley and Potter. She was reading a book, but her eyes weren't moving across the page. She was just glaring at the same paragraph, her left hand buried in her lap. He knew exactly what she was doing under the table. She was checking for a scar that hadn't been carved into her yet. I'm not looking at anyone, Draco said flatly. He stood up. He left his breakfast untouched. He needed to find her. They had rules to establish, and he didn't trust her not to panic and obliviate someone just to keep the timeline pure. The restricted section of the library was exactly as he remembered it. Dusty. Quiet. Smelling faintly of forbidden magic and decaying leather. He found her at a table in the back corner. She was surrounded by a fortress of books. There were 15 heavy tomes stacked around her, open to various pages on temporal theory, causal loops, and localized chronomancy. She had a piece of parchment covered in tiny, frantic handwriting. Draco pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. Granger jumped. Her hand flew to her wand. Relax, Granger. He drawled. It's just me. She lowered her wand, but her shoulders stayed rigid. What do you want, Malfoy? I want to make sure you aren't doing something incredibly stupid. He gestured to the wall of books. Though it looks like I might be too late. I am mapping out the preservation points, she said, her voice a tight whisper. If we're going to survive this without unravelling reality, we need to know exactly which events must remain untouched. Right. Draco leaned back in his chair. And how many preservation points have you found? 32, she said instantly. Major ones. The minor ones number in the hundreds. But the most critical is the cabinet. You have to fix it. If you don't, the Death Eaters don't enter the school in June. Dumbledore doesn't die exactly as planned. The entire chain of events leading to Voldemort's defeat is broken. Draco studied her. She was entirely serious. She was sitting in the Hogwarts library, surrounded by children who had no idea what was coming, and she was telling him he had to arrange a terrorist attack on the school. "Let me make sure I understand," Draco said, keeping his voice dead level. "Your brilliant plan for saving the timeline is for me to spend the next 9 months agonizing over a broken Vanishing Cabinet, so I can let a pack of murderers into the castle, resulting in the headmaster's death." "Yes. And if I refuse?" "You can't refuse," she hissed, leaning forward over the table. "Malfoy, if you don't do it, he'll kill you. He'll kill your mother." Draco's jaw locked. The familiar, cold spike of terror hit his chest. It was the same terror that had ruled his life for a year. "I am aware of the consequences, Granger," he said quietly. "Then you understand why we have to do it." "No, I don't." Draco leaned forward, matching her posture. He kept his voice low, a razor-sharp whisper. "I already lived through that year, Granger. I already fixed the bloody cabinet. I already watched them tear through this school. I am not doing it again. You have to. The causal loop." "Fuck the causal loop." She recoiled as if he'd struck her. "You don't mean that," she said, trembling slightly. "You know how this ends. We win. The Order wins." "Do they?" Draco laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Potter dies in the forest. Half your friends die in the castle. My family is destroyed. And we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, jumping at shadows." He leaned closer. "I'm not doing it again. I'm not playing my part so your golden boy can have his dramatic victory." Granger watched him, her chest rising and falling fast. She looked cornered. Desperate. "Then what's your plan?" she demanded. "Because if we change things, we don't know what happens next. The butterfly effect could be catastrophic. Voldemort could win." Draco sighed. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling the exhaustion settling deep into his bones. "We are from 3 years in the future, Granger," he said. "We know his secrets. We know about the Horcruxes. We know what he fears." He looked at her, holding her gaze. "We don't have to let the war happen exactly as it did. We can end it faster. Quieter." Granger was shaking her head before he even finished speaking. "No. It's too risky. If we destroy a Horcrux out of sequence, he'll know. He'll change their locations. We'll lose the advantage. We already have the advantage. We just have to use it. It's a violation of every temporal law. We are already a violation of temporal law." Draco pointed at the massive book in front of her. "Read me the chapter on surviving a shattered single-use chrono-displacement charm." She glared at him. "There isn't one." "Exactly. We are off the map. So stop trying to follow it." Granger crossed her arms over her chest, a physical barricade against his logic. "I'm not helping you destroy the timeline," she said stubbornly. "I'm not asking you to help me destroy it. I'm asking you to help me survive it." He watched her process the words. He watched the frantic logic in her eyes collide with the undeniable truth of their situation. They were trapped. Together. Rules of engagement, she said finally, her voice tight. Go on. No timeline meddling without the other's consent. She held up a finger, emphasizing the point. If you want to change something, you run it by me first. If I say no, we don't do it. And if I disagree with your veto, then we argue about it until we find a compromise. Draco considered it. It was a terrible plan. Arguing with Granger was a guaranteed migraine. But it was better than her reporting him to Dumbledore in a fit of temporal panic. Fine, he agreed. But the same applies to you. No unilateral action. Agreed. She picked up her quill, turning back to her parchment. She started writing rapidly, presumably documenting their treaty. There's one more thing, Draco said. She didn't look up. What? The cabinet. Her quill paused. We've discussed the cabinet. No, we haven't. Draco leaned back, crossing his arms. I'm not spending my entire 6th year living in terror, waiting for the Dark Lord to murder me because I can't fix a broken piece of furniture. We are going to find a way around it. There is no way around it. There is always a way around it, Granger. We just have to find it. She finally looked up at him. Her eyes were dark, calculating. If we find a way to fake your progress, she said slowly. If we can buy you time without actually letting them into the school. Exactly. It would require incredibly complex magic. Illusions. Forgeries. Things well beyond the 6th year curriculum. Good thing we aren't 6th years, then. Granger didn't smile, but the tension in her jaw eased slightly. The puzzle had presented itself. The challenge was accepted. I'll start researching, she said, pulling another heavy book toward her. Don't kill yourself over it, Draco said dryly. We have time. We have 9 months. That's practically nothing in terms of magical theory. Especially theory designed to fool the most accomplished legilimens in Europe. Draco leaned back and let out a slow exhale. She wasn't wrong. The Dark Lord's paranoia was legendary. But watching her mentally index every volume of dark arts theory in the library made him realize something crucial. He no longer had to carry the burden of the cabinet alone. He had the brightest, most ruthless witch of their age treating it like an extra credit assignment. We'll figure it out, he said. The certainty in his own voice surprised him. He watched her pack away the heavy tomes, noting the sharp, aggressive way she shoved them into her bag, and realized that the Gryffindor Golden Girl was just as broken as he was. Part 3. The Room of Hidden Things. The Room of Requirement smelled like 1,000 years of forgotten mistakes. Dust coated every surface. Towers of broken chairs and rusted cauldrons loomed in the shadows, threatening to collapse at the slightest provocation. It was suffocating. Hermione wiped a streak of grime from her forehead and glared at the massive, ominous wooden structure sitting in the clearing. The Vanishing Cabinet. It was a hideous piece of furniture. Heavy, dark wood, carved with knotted, twisting runes that made her eyes water if she looked at them too long. It felt wrong just standing near it. It radiated a cold, metallic hum that vibrated deep in her teeth. The structural integrity of the illusion is failing at the base matrix, she muttered. She dragged her wand in a complex geometric pattern through the air. A faint shimmer of blue light wrapped around the cabinet, pulsed twice, and shattered like glass. Damn it! You're rushing the incantation, Draco said. He was sitting on a dusty, velvet armchair a few feet away, a massive arithmancy tome open on his lap. He had taken his tie off an hour ago. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, exposing the pale skin of his forearms. The skin that was still unmarked. Hermione forced her eyes back to the cabinet. "I am not rushing the incantation," she snapped. "The incantation is perfectly paced. The problem is the dark mark resonance variable. The variable is sound. The variable is theoretical. We are trying to cast a localized sensory illusion that will not only fool a visual inspection, but will register as magically complete to a dark artifact." She threw her hands up in frustration. "It's like trying to knit a sweater out of fog. It's a localized chronomantic projection layered with a sensory masking charm." Draco corrected smoothly, not looking up from his book. "It's difficult, not impossible." "Then you cast it." "I am currently calculating the decay rate of the projection," he said, turning a page. "Which I cannot do if you keep shattering the base matrix every 3 minutes. It had been 2 months since their treaty in the library. 2 months of sneaking into the dusty corridor on the 7th floor. 2 months of grueling, exhausting magical theory. They met 3 times a week, hidden away from the rest of the school, poring over texts that Madame Pince would have had a heart attack just seeing. And they were getting nowhere. The plan was simple on paper. They couldn't leave the cabinet broken, because Voldemort would know Draco was failing. They couldn't fix it, because the Death Eaters would use it. So, they had to fake it. They were trying to construct a magical forgery and illusion so dense and complex that it would broadcast the exact magical signature of a repaired Vanishing Cabinet, satisfying Voldemort's remote checks without actually functioning as a portal. It was brilliant. It was foolproof. It was also completely impossible. "I need to adjust the vector," Hermione said, ignoring his comment. She pulled her notes toward her, scanning the dense columns of numbers. "If I anchor the projection to the physical runes rather than the ambient magic, that won't work. You haven't even looked at the math." "I don't need to look at the math, Granger. The physical runes are degraded. If you anchor the illusion to them, the projection will collapse the moment someone opens the door." Hermione ground her teeth together. She hated it when he was right. She hated it even more that he was right so often. Before the battle, before she had broken time, she had always thought of Draco Malfoy as cruel, but not particularly bright. He was lazy. He relied on his name and his father's money. The boy sitting in the armchair was not lazy. He was brilliant. Sharper than anyone she had ever worked with, his mind moving in cold, logical leaps that left her scrambling to keep up. It was infuriating. "Fine," she clipped. "Then we anchor it to the ambient magic. But the resonance feedback is too strong. Every time I try to seal the outer layer, the cabinet's natural magical field pushes back." "You're forcing it," he said. He closed the heavy book with a thud and stood up. "You're trying to suppress the cabinet's magic. You have to weave the illusion into it." He walked over to where she was standing. He stopped next to her. The room was freezing, but she could feel the heat radiating off him. He smelled like parchment and expensive soap, a sharp, clean scent that cut through the musty air of the room. "Show me the notes," he said. Hermione didn't move. She just watched him. They were close. Closer than they usually allowed themselves to be. Their unspoken rules of engagement usually kept a solid 3 feet of distance between them at all times. a DMZ of dusty floorboards. But he was right there. The notes. Granger. He repeated, his voice dropping a fraction of a decibel. She swallowed hard and pushed the parchment toward him. He leaned over the table, his shoulder brushing against hers. Hermione went perfectly still. She stopped breathing. The contact was light, barely a whisper of fabric against fabric, but it sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down her spine. He didn't seem to notice. He was focused on the equations, his eyes scanning the numbers with ruthless efficiency. "Here," he said, pointing to a line in the middle of the page. "You're calculating the magical output based on a standard portal matrix. But this isn't a standard portal. It's a linked pair. The magical output is halved because it's actively seeking its anchor in Borgin and Burke's." He reached for the quill she had left resting on the parchment. Hermione reached for it at the exact same moment. Their hands collided. Draco's fingers closed over hers. The world stopped. Hermione didn't pull away. She couldn't. Her hand was trapped beneath his, her knuckles pressed against the cool, smooth skin of his palm. His fingers were long, elegant, calloused at the tips from years of holding a wand. She looked up. He wasn't looking at the notes anymore. He was looking at her. His grey eyes were wide, the pupils blown wide in the dim light. The exhaustion that usually hardened his features was gone, replaced by something entirely different. Something sharp. Something intensely focused. He was breathing quickly, a shallow, uneven rhythm that mirrored her own. They were standing inches apart. The silence in the room was absolute, pressing against their ears, heavy and charged. For a terrifying, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Every logical thought in Hermione's brain evaporated. The cabinet, the war, the timeline, it all vanished. There was only the feeling of his hand over hers, the heat of his skin, the intense, searching look in his eyes. She realized, with a sudden, panicked clarity, that she was leaning toward him. Her body was moving on its own, drawn by the invisible gravity that seemed to have suddenly manifested between them. She leaned forward, her weight shifting just a fraction of an inch, wanting to feel the warmth radiating from his jaw. Draco's gaze dropped to her mouth. He swallowed, the movement sharp against his throat. His fingers tightened on hers, a brief, crushing pressure. Then, as if a spell had broken, he yanked his hand back. He stepped away from the table so fast he nearly knocked over a stack of old cauldrons. "Right," he said. His voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again, forcing the cold, aristocratic drawl back into place. "Right. The Matrix." Hermione dragged in a shaky breath. Her hand felt cold where his had been. "The Matrix," she repeated, her voice sounding entirely too high. She pulled her hand back, tucking it safely against her chest. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. She stared at the parchment, the numbers blurring together into a meaningless jumble of ink. "You need to divide the base output by 2. Draco said, his voice entirely steady now. The mask was back perfectly in place. "Then apply the masking charm." "Right. Yes. Of course." Hermione grabbed her wand. Her fingers were trembling. She forced them to grip the wood tightly. She turned back to the Vanishing Cabinet and forced her eyes shut. She needed logic. She shoved the memory of his hand into a dark corner of her brain, locked it there, and raised her wand. She didn't rush the incantation this time. She spoke the words deliberately, letting the magic build in her chest before channeling it down her arm, weaving the illusion into the existing resonance just as he had said. A pulse of silver light erupted from the tip of her wand. It coated the cabinet, wrapping around the dark wood like a second skin. It shimmered briefly, a complex web of runes and magical signatures, before sinking into the wood and vanishing completely. The room went quiet. The metallic hum that had been vibrating in Hermione's teeth stopped. She lowered her wand, her breath catching in her throat. Did it work? She whispered. Draco stepped up beside her. He didn't get as close this time. He kept a safe, deliberate distance. He pulled his own wand and cast a rapid series of diagnostic charms at the cabinet. Sparks of different colors flared in the air, interpreting the magical feedback. Draco watched the sparks, his expression unreadable. Well? Hermione demanded, the tension in the room stretching tight. Draco lowered his wand. He turned to look at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had seen him smile since she had known him. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't cruel. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. It's perfect. He breathed. It reads as completely repaired. But the physical pathway is entirely sealed. The Dark Lord will feel the resonance, but he won't be able to send anything through. Hermione let out a laugh, a sharp, disbelieving sound. We did it, she said. We bought ourselves time. He corrected, but the triumph in his voice was unmistakable. They stood there in the dusty clearing, looking at the massive, useless piece of furniture that they had just turned into their greatest weapon. For a moment, they weren't enemies. They weren't soldiers from the future trapped in a nightmare. They were just two people who had accomplished the impossible. Hermione looked at Draco. He was still smiling, his eyes bright in the gloom. She felt that dangerous gravity pull at her again. She took a step back. The movement broke the spell. The smile vanished from Draco's face, replaced instantly by the familiar, guarded mask. He looked away, his jaw tightening. We should go, he said quietly. Before Filch starts his rounds. Right, Hermione said. She grabbed her bag, shoving her notes inside. She couldn't meet his eyes. They left the room of requirement in silence, slipping out into the empty corridor. They went in opposite directions without saying a word. Hermione walked quickly, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the castle. She looked away from him, her heart thumping a frantic, unsteady rhythm against her ribs, terrified by how easily she could forget they were at war. Part 4. The Christmas truce. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, burying the grounds of Hogwarts under a blanket of absolute white. Draco sat on the cold stone edge of the Astronomy Tower, his legs dangling over the precipice. The wind whipped at his hair, biting at his exposed cheeks. He didn't cast a warming charm. He let the cold seep into his bones, welcoming the physical ache. It was Christmas Eve. In the Slytherin common room, there was a fire roaring in the hearth. People were exchanging gifts. They were laughing. They were drinking butterbeer and pretending that the world outside the castle walls wasn't preparing to burn. They were children. Ignorant, blissful children. Draco unscrewed the cap of the fire whiskey he had smuggled from Hogsmeade and took a long, burning pull. The liquid fire slid down his throat, pooling in his stomach, but it didn't touch the ice in his chest. It was a pathetic attempt at rebellion. getting drunk on the Astronomy Tower while the rest of the school played games and opened brightly wrapped packages. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of a choir practicing carols somewhere down below. The cheerful melody felt like a physical assault. His hand tightened around the glass bottle until his knuckles turned white. He could almost feel the satisfaction of shattering it against the stone, of screaming at them until they understood they were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. His parents were alive. They were sitting in Malfoy Manor right now. His mother was probably ordering the house elves to decorate the drawing room. His father was probably drinking brandy in his study, planning his next move for the Dark Lord. They were alive, and they were breathing, and Draco knew with absolute certainty that he could not save them. The knowledge was a physical weight, pressing against his ribs until he felt like he couldn't breathe. If he warned them, if he told them what the Dark Lord was going to do, he would alter the timeline. The carefully constructed web of cause and effect that Granger was so desperately trying to protect would unravel. And if it unraveled, the Dark Lord might win. The war might last forever. Draco took another drink, gazing out over the black lake. The surface was completely frozen over, a flat, dead expanse of white. He was choosing Granger's causal loop over his own family. He was choosing to let the timeline play out, knowing exactly what it would cost him. He was a coward. Or maybe he was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of bleeding for a cause he didn't believe in anymore. Footsteps sounded on the stone stairs behind him. Draco didn't turn around. He just tightened his grip on the bottle. He didn't draw his wand. The footsteps were too light to be Filch, too hesitant to be Snape. "You're going to freeze to death out here." Granger's voice was quiet, nearly swallowed by the wind. Draco looked over his shoulder. She was standing at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a thick Gryffindor scarf and a heavy wool coat. Her hair was a wild, static-filled mess, dusted with snow from the open archways. She looked cold. She looked tired. "Go away, Granger," he said, turning back to the lake. She didn't go away. He heard the soft scuff of her sensible shoes against the stone. A moment later, she sat down on the edge of the tower next to him, leaving a careful 2 feet of space between them. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her legs. The common room was too loud. She said simply. Draco snorted. Gryffindors never could learn how to celebrate quietly. It wasn't just the noise. She said. Her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. It was them. They're all so happy. They're making plans for the new year. They're talking about NEWTS and Quidditch and they have no idea, Draco finished for her. No. She rested her chin on her knees. They don't. They sat in silence for a long time. The wind howled through the tower, swirling the snow around them in a chaotic dance. Draco held the bottle out toward her. He didn't look at her. He just offered it, an olive branch carved out of glass and cheap alcohol. Granger looked at the bottle. Then she looked at him. She reached out and took it, her fingers brushing his and sending a ghost of that same electricity racing up his arm. She ignored it, wiping the rim of the bottle with her sleeve before taking a small sip. She immediately coughed, her eyes watering. "Merlin, what is that?" She gasped, handing it back. Ogden's old fire whiskey. Draco said, taking it from her. "It's supposed to burn. It tastes like paint thinner. You would know, Granger. He took another drink, savoring the burn. The silence stretched between them again, but it had changed. The rigid, defensive perimeter they usually maintained around each other had softened. The edges were blurring, worn down by the snow and the alcohol and the sheer, exhausting weight of their shared secret. He handed the bottle back to her. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before taking it. She didn't wipe the rim this time. She just tipped it back and swallowed, her eyes squeezing shut as the alcohol hit the back of her throat. "Better?" he asked, a faint trace of amusement threading through his voice. "No," she said, her voice rough. She set the bottle on the stone between them. "It's awful. But it helps." A glowing endorsement for Ogden's. She let out a short, breathy sound that might have been a laugh in another lifetime. She pulled her knees tighter against her chest, burying her chin in the thick wool of her scarf. "What did you miss the most?" Draco asked quietly. He didn't know why he asked. It was a dangerous question. It required looking backward, something they explicitly avoided during their frantic meetings in the Room of Hidden Things. Granger didn't answer immediately. She watched the snow falling over the forbidden forest. "I missed the feeling of not being hunted," she said softly. The words were so quiet, he almost missed them over the wind. "In the tent," she continued, her voice remarkably steady. "Every time a twig snapped, every time the wind changed direction, I thought it was them. The Snatchers. The Death Eaters. I missed being able to sleep without a wand in my hand." Draco looked at her. Her profile was sharp against the dark sky, illuminated only by the faint, silvery light of the moon reflecting off the snow. She looked incredibly small. He had spent 5 years calling her names, treating her like she was something less than human. He had spent a year watching the Dark Lord's forces try to hunt her down like an animal. And now, she was sitting next to him on a frozen tower, sharing a bottle of cheap liquor and admitting she was terrified. "What about you?" she asked, turning her head to look at him. Draco looked down at the bottle in his hands. He traced the rim with his thumb. "I missed the quiet." He admitted. "The quiet? My house was never quiet after he took it over." Draco said. The words tasted like bile, but he forced them out anyway. There were always people. Meeting. Planning. Screaming. He swallowed hard. The dungeons were directly beneath the drawing room. You could hear everything. Granger went completely still. She knew exactly who had been in those dungeons. She knew exactly what had happened to them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." He snapped, the old defensiveness flaring up automatically. "It was my family's fault. We invited him in. We set the table for the slaughter." "You didn't invite him in, Draco. You were a child." Draco went rigid. It was the first time she had used his given name. It hung in the air between them, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the freezing wind. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The hostility that had defined their relationship for 6 years, the sneers, the insults, the carefully constructed walls, it all completely fractured. The structure gave way, collapsing into the snow. He didn't see the Gryffindor know-it-all, nor the mudblood his father had taught him to despise. He saw a soldier. A survivor. The only person in the world who understood him. He shifted his weight, sliding his boots against the stone to erase the careful boundaries they had drawn. Granger didn't pull away. She turned fully toward him, her large, brown eyes locked onto his. Her breath plumed in the cold air, white and rapid. "We're going to fix it," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce, desperate whisper. "The cabinet is secured. The illusion is stable. We're going to get through this year." "And then what?" Draco asked. His voice was rough. "And then we survive. We let the timeline play out. We let Potter do what he needs to do, and we survive. Just like that. Just like that." He reached out. It was an impulsive, reckless movement. He didn't think. He just needed to touch her. He brushed a stray snowflake from her cheek. Her skin was freezing, but the contact sent a jolt of fire straight through him. Granger gasped, a tiny, sharp intake of breath. Her eyes went impossibly wide. Draco didn't pull his hand back. He let his fingers trail down her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. She was trembling. He could feel the tiny shivers racking her body, and he knew, with terrifying certainty, that it had nothing to do with the cold. "Granger," he murmured. "Don't," she breathed. But she leaned into his touch. The contradiction was staggering. Her logic was telling her to run, to push him away, to re-establish the DMZ. But her body was leaning closer, seeking the heat of his hand. Draco moved closer. The scent of her parchment, cold air, and something distinctly floral filled his senses. He could see the individual flakes of snow caught in her eyelashes. He could see the pulse jumping wildly at the base of her throat. He wanted to kiss her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't a passing thought. It was a violent, overwhelming need. He leaned in, letting his mouth hover just a fraction of an inch from hers, desperate to taste the fire whiskey on her lips and erase the timeline entirely. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. He needed to survive with her. He tilted his head. Granger's breath hitched again. Her eyes fluttered closed. She was waiting for it. Somewhere in the distance, the Hogwarts clock tower began to chime. Midnight. The sound was loud, heavy, echoing across the frozen lake. Granger's eyes snapped open. The spell broke instantly. The reality of who they were, of where they were, crashed down on them with the force of an avalanche. She pulled back, scrambling away from his touch as if he had burned her. I have to go," she stammered, her voice frantic. "Granger, wait. I have to go. It's late. Filch will be patrolling." She didn't look at him. She scrambled to her feet, wrapping her coat tightly around herself, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Hermione," he said. She halted at the sound of her name. For a second, he thought she might turn around. He thought she might come back. But she didn't. She ran for the stairs, disappearing into the shadows of the castle without looking back. Draco sat alone on the edge of the tower. The wind was howling again, biting at his exposed skin, but he didn't feel the cold. He could still feel the phantom heat of her cheek against his fingers. He picked up the bottle of fire whiskey and examined the amber glass. It was completely empty now. He didn't even remember drinking the rest of it, the alcohol doing nothing to numb the ache in his chest. He tipped the bottle over the edge of the tower, watching it fall into the darkness until it shattered against the rocks far below. The sound was swallowed instantly by the howling wind, leaving him in absolute, suffocating silence. He sat there for a long time, the cold seeping past his uniform and settling deep into his bones. He watched her walk away, her footprints small and precise in the fresh snow, knowing with absolute, terrifying certainty that he was going to ruin everything for her. Because he knew now that when the time came, he wouldn't choose the timeline. He would choose her. Part 5. The collapse may arrived with a suffocating, oppressive heat. The air in the castle felt heavy, thick with the approaching storm. The students were studying for their exams, completely oblivious to the fact that their world was resting on a knife's edge. Hermione was pacing the deserted corridor outside the room of requirement. She checked her watch. It was past midnight. Draco was inside. He had been inside for 3 hours, attempting to reinforce the illusion matrix. The Dark Lord had grown impatient. Over the last 2 weeks, the remote magical probes testing the cabinet's resonance had become more frequent, more aggressive. The illusion was holding, but it was cracking under the sheer, brutal weight of Voldemort's magic. Hermione bit her thumbnail, her eyes fixed on the blank stretch of wall where the door should be. They had maintained their DMZ since Christmas. After the near kiss on the Astronomy Tower, she had fled in a panic, and they had spent the last 5 months pretending it hadn't happened. They stuck to the math. They stuck to the rules of engagement. They never stood too close. But the air between them was constantly vibrating with the unspoken weight of it. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the corridor. It wasn't a physical sound. It was the sound of magic fracturing, a high-pitched, agonizing screech that made the hairs on Hermione's arms stand up. The blank stone wall shimmered, the heavy oak door materializing with a violent shudder. Hermione didn't think. She shoved the door open and ran inside. The room of hidden things was a disaster zone. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burning wood. Dust was raining down from the ceiling in thick clouds. And in the center of the clearing, the Vanishing Cabinet was tearing itself apart. The silver web of their illusion charm was flaking away like dead skin. Dark, violet light was pouring out of the cracks in the wood, pulsing with a sick, erratic heartbeat. Draco was standing directly in front of it. His wand was raised, his face pale and twisted with effort. He was pouring a continuous stream of golden containment magic into the cabinet, but the violet light was chewing through it effortlessly. "Malfoy!" She screamed over the roar of the magic. He didn't turn around. "Stay back, Granger. The Matrix is gone. He's forcing the connection from the other side. We have to seal it." She ran forward, drawing her wand and throwing a heavy, localized shielding charm over the base of the cabinet. It sparked against the violet light, holding for a fraction of a second before the dark magic consumed it. "They're trying to cross through," Draco yelled, his voice cracking. "The physical pathway is reopening. If they cross, the timeline is dead." Hermione didn't care about the timeline. Not right now. She looked at Draco. The golden magic pouring from his wand was weakening. He was shaking, the physical toll of holding back the Dark Lord's magic draining the life out of him. He looked like he was about to collapse. "Drop the shield," she shouted. "Are you insane? Drop the shield and cast a structural collapse. We have to destroy the cabinet. If I destroy it, he'll know I betrayed him. If they come through, we both die right now. Do it." Draco ground his teeth. The violet light was spilling out of the cabinet's seams, the doors rattling violently on their hinges. Something heavy slammed against the wood from the inside. They were here. Draco dropped the golden containment field. He slashed his wand through the air in a brutal, jagged arc. Reducto! The blasting curse hit the cabinet with the force of a bomb. The explosion was blinding. A shockwave of pure, untethered magic ripped through the clearing, shattering the towers of junk around them. Hermione was thrown backward. She hit the floor hard, the breath knocked out of her lungs in a sharp, agonizing rush. Shrapnel rained down on them, splinters of dark wood, twisted metal, and shattered glass. The deafening roar of the magic faded, replaced by the eerie, settling silence of destruction. Hermione gasped for air, her ears ringing. She pushed herself up on her elbows, coughing on the thick cloud of dust. The Vanishing Cabinet was gone. In its place was a smoking crater of splintered wood and scorched stone. The violet light had vanished. The connection was broken. Malfoy? She rasped. There was no answer. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her ribs, and ran through the smoke. Draco! She found him 10 feet away, slumped against the base of a towering pile of broken furniture. He wasn't moving. No, 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 Hermione breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes were closed. His face was covered in a layer of grey dust, stark against his pale skin. A dark, jagged cut ran along his temple, blood welling up and tracking down the side of his face. He had taken the brunt of the magical backlash to shield her. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She reached out, her fingers hovering over his face, terrified to touch him, terrified of what she might find. She pressed 2 fingers against the pulse point at his throat. It was there, steady and strong. She let out a ragged sob, the adrenaline crashing out of her system all at once, leaving nothing but sheer, overwhelming terror. She brushed the hair away from his forehead, her thumb wiping frantically at the blood on his temple. Draco! Draco, please. Open your eyes. He groaned, a low, rough sound in the back of his throat. His eyelashes fluttered, parting to reveal the familiar, stormy grey of his eyes. They were unfocused for a second before they locked onto her face. Granger, he rasped. I'm here. She said, her voice breaking. I'm here. You're bleeding. You took the backlash. She pulled her wand, intending to cast a healing charm on his head, but she never got the chance. Draco reached up and grabbed her wrists. His grip was desperate, bruisingly tight. He didn't push her away. He pulled her down. The world tilted. Hermione crashed against his chest. Before she could process the movement, before she could draw a breath, his hand tangled in the hair at the nape of her neck, and his mouth crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't careful or calculated or restrained. It was a collision. It was months of careful distance, of unspoken rules, of terrified, suffocating tension, finally shattering. It tasted like blood and spell smoke and absolute desperation. Hermione made a soft, broken sound against his mouth. She didn't pull away. She leaned into it, dropping her wand onto the dusty floor. Her hands moved to his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw, anchoring herself to him. He kissed her like the world was ending. He kissed her like she was the only oxygen left in the room. His hand tightened in her hair, pulling her closer, erasing every millimeter of space between them. The heat of his body burned through the thin fabric of her shirt, grounding her, reminding her that they were alive. That they had survived. She kissed him back with the same frantic energy, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break them. She didn't care about the rules. She didn't care about the DMZ. She only cared about the feeling of his lips on hers, the desperate, unyielding reality of him. They were a paradox. They were a violation of temporal law. They were two soldiers from a dead future, bleeding on the floor of a castle that didn't know it was at war. And for the first time since she had cast the spell that broke time, Hermione didn't care. Draco shifted, his other arm wrapping tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He groaned into her mouth, a deeply vulnerable sound that completely undid the last of her restraint. She opened her mouth to him, deepening the kiss, letting him take everything he needed. When they finally broke apart, they were both gasping for air. Hermione rested her forehead against his, her chest heaving. Her lips were bruised and stinging. Her heart was racing. Draco's eyes were dark, burning with an intensity that pinned her to the floor. He was looking at her like he had never seen her before. Like she was the only thing in the room. He reached up, his thumb brushing a streak of grime from her cheek. His hand was shaking just as much as hers. "You're alive," he whispered. "I'm alive," she confirmed, the words catching in her throat. They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together in the dust and the ruins of the cabinet. The terrifying realization slowly settled over her. The cabinet was destroyed. The Death Eaters were cut off. The timeline was completely, hopelessly broken. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, the terrifying realization set in. The cabinet was a pile of ash, the timeline was dead, and she didn't care about anything but the boy bleeding in her arms. Part 6. The new timeline. June drifted into the Scottish Highlands like a slow, heavy exhale. The air was warm, smelling of damp earth and blooming nightshade. The sky was completely clear, a vast, unbroken canvas of glittering stars that stretched over the Hogwarts grounds. Draco stood on the Astronomy Tower, leaning against the cold stone balustrade. He was looking down at the Black Lake. The water was perfectly calm, reflecting the moonlight like a sheet of dark glass. There were no dark marks burning in the sky above the castle. There was no screaming. There was no smell of ozone and burning flesh. It was a Tuesday. It was the night Dumbledore was supposed to die. Draco traced the rough edge of the stone with his thumb. According to the timeline they had abandoned, right now, at this exact minute, Fenrir Greyback and Bellatrix Lestrange should have been marching through the Vanishing Cabinet. They should have been pouring into the Room of Requirement, wands drawn, ready to slaughter anyone in their path. He should have been standing right here on this tower, his wand pointed at his headmaster's chest. He should have been shaking, terrified, breaking his own soul to save his parents. But the Vanishing Cabinet was nothing more than a pile of ash in the 7th floor corridor. The Death Eaters were cut off. Dumbledore was currently asleep in his office. The timeline had officially, irreversibly diverged. They had broken the causal loop. They had severed the tether to the future they knew, casting themselves adrift into completely uncharted waters. Draco didn't feel terrified. He didn't feel the crushing weight of the Dark Lord's expectations anymore. He felt strangely, impossibly light. Footsteps sounded on the stone stairs. They weren't the heavy, dragging steps of a teacher on patrol. They were light. Quick. Deliberate. Draco turned around. Hermione stepped out of the stairwell and onto the observation deck. She was wearing a simple muggle sweater, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and a pair of faded jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, stray curls escaping to frame her face. She looked breathless. "Filch?" Draco asked quietly. "Peeves," she corrected, walking toward him. He was dropping water balloons in the fourth-floor corridor. "I had to take the long way around." She stopped next to him, leaning her elbows against the stone balustrade. She didn't leave a 2-foot gap this time. She stood close enough that their shoulders brushed. The DMZ was gone. It had burned to the ground along with the cabinet a month ago. Since the explosion in the room of requirement, they hadn't spoken about what had happened. They hadn't talked about the frantic, desperate kiss in the dust and smoke. They had been too focused on the immediate forelight covering their tracks, avoiding the professors, waiting for Voldemort's wrath to fall. But the wrath hadn't come. The Dark Lord had gone entirely silent. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Draco checked the silver watch on his left wrist. "Midnight," he said. Hermione closed her eyes. She let out a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders dropping an inch. "He's alive," she murmured. "He's alive," Draco confirmed. "The castle is secure. The perimeter wards haven't shifted. Nothing is coming." They stood in silence, watching the stars reflect on the surface of the lake. The sheer magnitude of what they had done was finally settling over them. They hadn't just survived the year. They had rewritten the fundamental architecture of the war. Harry Potter wasn't going to spend the next year hunting Horcruxes in the woods, cold and starving and hunted. The Order of the Phoenix wasn't going to be crippled by the loss of their leader. The Battle of Hogwarts wasn't going to happen on the same day, in the same way. Every advantage of foreknowledge they had possessed was gone. "We're flying blind now," Hermione said. She opened her eyes, turning her head to look at him. The moonlight caught the golden flecks in her brown eyes. "Every variable has changed. We don't know what Voldemort will do next. We don't know how the war ends." "I know," Draco said. "Are you scared?" He looked at her, his mind flashing to his parents locked away in Malfoy Manor, completely oblivious to his treason. He pictured the Dark Lord pacing the drawing room, realizing his spy had failed, before his thoughts settled entirely on the terrifying, blank canvas of their new future. "No," Draco said truthfully. He shifted his weight, turning to face her fully. He reached out, his hand tracing the line of her jaw. His fingers brushed against her pulse point. It was steady. Calm. A drastic change from the frantic, terrified rhythm it had beaten in the room of requirement. "I spent a year living a future that was already written," he told her, his voice low and steady. "I spent a year knowing exactly how I was going to lose everything. I don't care that I don't know what happens tomorrow." Hermione leaned into his touch. "We broke time," she whispered, looking at the peaceful grounds below them, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and residual fear. "Good," Draco said, pulling her gently against his chest. "I didn't like the old one anyway." Hermione let out a soft, breathy laugh. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against the soft cotton of his shirt. Draco closed his arms around her, holding her tight. She fit perfectly against him. The sharp angles of his body and the soft curves of hers clicked together like a lock finally finding its key. It was a physical alignment that defied every rule they had ever been taught. Gryffindor and Slytherin. Mudblood and pureblood. None of those labels mattered anymore. They were relics of a timeline that no longer existed. What do we do now? Hermione mumbled against his chest. Now. Draco rested his chin on the top of her head. He inhaled the scent of her shampoo, grounding himself in the absolute reality of her presence. Now we fight. We find Potter. We tell Dumbledore everything. We tear the Dark Lord's empire down brick by brick. Hermione pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were wide, searching his face. The hesitation was gone. The fear was gone. She looked fierce. She looked like a soldier ready to march into a war she actually believed she could win. Together? She asked. It wasn't really a question. It was a vow. Draco smiled. It wasn't his usual smirk. It was a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes. Together. He promised. He lowered his head, closing the final few inches between them. The kiss was entirely different from the one in the room of requirement. There was no desperation this time. There was no terror. There was no frantic need to prove they were still alive. It was slow. Deliberate. It was a seal pressed into the fresh wax of their new reality. Hermione's lips were soft against his. She tasted like peppermint and something entirely her own. She kissed him back with a steady, quiet confidence, her hands sliding up his back to rest against his shoulders. The world around them faded away. The war was still coming. The Dark Lord was still out there. They still had a mountain to climb, and they had no idea what was waiting for them at the summit. They had broken the universe, and eventually, the universe would demand payment. But Draco didn't care. He pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, anchoring himself to the only constant he had left. He kissed her under the light of the stars, perfectly content to let the future right itself.